Thank you all so much for joining us. We're going to give it just another moment for folks to log in. All right, welcome to today's Better Buildings webinar. We are dedicated to bringing you the latest actionable insights from leading industry experts. Better Buildings webinars are a chance to explore the topics, technologies, and trends that affect your organization. Next, you are in the right place if you are here to hear about For the Birds, energy co-benefits of bird-friendly buildings. And we're really excited for this one to partner with Fish and Wildlife Service to bring you this webinar today. A couple of housekeeping items I want to start with. The first is that this will be recorded and also archived on the Better Buildings Solutions Center. So after the fact, you'll be able to revisit this as a recording or share with colleagues. Because of that, you are also all in listen-only mode, which means you're not able to unmute yourself to speak. However, that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. We'll be talking about more platforms that you can use for Q&A and to interact with us. Next slide. My name's Hannah Debelius, and I'm with the U.S. Department of Energy, and I have the wonderful pleasure of working with all of our commercial partners in the Better Buildings program. On today's agenda, next slide, we are going to be, of course, talking about these co-benefits between bird-friendly buildings and energy efficiency. We'll start with an overview. Welcome to an introduction and overview. I want to hear a little bit about you all, so we're going to do some polls. And then we'll have some speaker presentations, both from Fish and Wildlife Service and also from an architect that's out there in the field working on these buildings. And as always, we want to hear from you and engage. And so we'll end with Q&A from our audience. For our polls today, next slide, we are going to be using a platform that's called Slido. So you can right now open up your phone or another browser, go to slido.com and put in the event code DOE. We're going to be using this to do some polls and also Q&A. So I'm going to say it again so you do it in real time. Go to slido.com and then enter the event code DOE, and that'll get you right into the platform that we'll be using. All right. And with that, we're going to launch our first poll. So my first question is just how familiar are you with bird-friendly building design? So far, a lot of people are here to learn, which is what we like to see. I think we'll be able to introduce you to this topic then and also get some real world examples. Okay, a lot of folks in the middle of the road here. Maybe you know what to do, but you haven't had the opportunity yet to make some changes. And a couple of experts on the line as well. Excellent. This bodes well for our Q&A. Okay, I think we can move forward to our next poll. And if you're just joining us, you can get in on the polls by going to slido.com and putting the event code DOE. Our next question is, do you own or manage buildings in an area with bird-friendly requirements for commercial buildings? We know that there are a couple of areas around the country here where you might be required to make some design choices, and I'm curious if that's impacting you. Maybe that's a motivating factor, or maybe it's your love of birds, or hopefully after this session, your love of energy efficiency. Okay, so a few folks on the line who are working with some requirements. All right, we've got one more poll for you all. And that question is open-ended, but which bird-friendly building features or practices are you most familiar with? We're going to cover a lot of different technologies or practices today for building envelope and lighting and that sort of thing. So would love to hear. Yeah, absolutely dealing with glass or glazing, window patterns, a lot on building envelope. Feather friendly, the gold standard. I just learned about that from an event I went to at Fish and Wildlife Service a couple of months ago that really impacted me and my interest in this topic. All right, a lot of things about windows and building envelope and lights, which is great. I think we're going to cover all of these things today. Excellent. Well, for all of our audience, I hope that you will keep slido.com open because Anytime throughout today's webinar, you can use Slido to submit your questions. You can submit questions for our panelists there, or if you see a question that you like, you can also hit that thumbs up, and it actually moves up our list, so we're more likely to be able to address it when we get to questions at the end of this webinar. All right, well, thank you so much for everybody who answered our polls. This is really helpful to hear from our speakers, and we're gonna switch back to our slides here. Speaking of our speakers, we are really excited to welcome Joel and Brian, both from Fish and Wildlife Service, and Dan from FX Collaborative. Next slide. We're going to be kicking things off. Dr. Joel Gehring is a biologist in the Division of Bird Conservation, Permits, and Regulations in the Migratory Bird Program of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And her colleague Brian Smith is an assistant regional director in the Midwest region of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, where he oversees all aspects of the regional migratory bird program, wears a couple other hats related to birds. So I'm excited to turn it over to Joel and Brian Joelle and Brian to tell you a little bit more about this topic, especially for all of you who just told us you were just getting started in this. So Joelle and Brian, go ahead and bring your cameras on and you can jump in.
Thank you, Hannah. I am so happy to be here to speak with you guys today. We've been learning a lot about the Better Buildings program from Hannah and her colleagues, and this is a great opportunity for us to see the nexus between the work that we do at the Fish and Wildlife Service and at Department of Energy. So thank you very much for the invitation. We are all familiar with the efforts to increase energy efficiency in our buildings, and many of us are familiar with the uncomfortable sound of birds hitting our glass windows. And the poll was very interesting to see how many of us out there have been thinking about this, working on this, etc. And the techniques that you mentioned, some of which you'll see today in the presentation. So today we're happy to share with you additional opportunities to increase energy efficiency, increase bird conservation, and really increase the well-being of our tenants, customers, employees using our buildings, etc. Next. So the solutions that we're sharing today focus on glass and lighting, and that works to accomplish all of these goals. And I want to, in the next two slides, this one and the next slide, I really want to emphasize that this can occur with both buildings from the design and construction phase. And next slide. And also from the retrofit side of things. And on the far right side, you see FRIT, and which is part of a renovation. And in the middle there, you'll see some films that we'll talk about that are definitely part of a retrofit of an existing building. Next slide, please. So again, renovations and retrofits can both be energy efficient and bird friendly. So why birds? Well, about a third of our population in the United States is engaged in watching birds. And most of those people are spending money on that hobby. So this is part of our economy. It's part of our society and our culture, and it's diverse in the ages, incomes, education levels across the country. In summary, people enjoy birds, and those birds are linked to their well-being. Next slide. And we often think about, well, we go for a hike to see birds, or, birds are at the wetland, at the golf course that I go to. Those things are all true, but birds are also all around us. I'm actually just caught a glimpse of one outside my window right now. So birds are around us when we take out the garbage, when we walk the dog, when we shovel snow, like we've been doing in the Upper Midwest recently. They are near our schools, our offices, and in our parks. And they live in our lives, and we and our infrastructure live in their worlds as well. Next slide. And our birds have suffered significant losses over the last 50 years. We've lost about 30% of our birds in that time. And that's about 3 billion birds since 1970. And many of those birds are the same species that are involved in the topic we're talking about today, collisions with facilities and buildings. And this is part of the issue, collisions with buildings, and there are other issues as well, such as the loss of nesting and feeding areas, etc. But we have reason for hope as well. You can see in the image on the right, in the same 50 years, we had a significant increase in the amount of waterfowl, so ducks and geese, and also birds of prey, raptors, hawks and eagles have seen a significant increase in the last 50 years. So why would that be? Why are we seeing a decrease in the numbers of songbirds and shorebirds and that type of thing, but seeing an increase in some species? It's because we knew what to do to help those populations, and we did it. We followed through. So with waterfowl and birds of prey, we took action with partnerships. We each did our part. We decreased the amount of DDT in the environment. We increased our protection for wetlands. And therefore, we increased the population of those birds. So when we have an opportunity to manage these birds and to manage our behaviors, we can significantly change these bird populations for the better. And today we're going to share with you opportunities where we can do the same thing with some of these songbirds that are declining in our environment right now. So we have the tools. We want to work in partnership with everyone we can to help increase these bird populations the same way we've done with birds of prey and waterfowl in the last 50 years. Next slide. So what is this issue? Well, glass collisions are involved in about 1 billion bird fatalities each year in the United States alone. That's just in the United States. And when I first started getting involved in this issue, I thought, oh, this is a big city issue, you know, those tall skyscrapers. Yes, we do see bird fatalities at tall buildings, definitely. But if you think about the numbers of buildings that are across the landscape, most of them are not super tall buildings. They're low-rise buildings, like the one here, that's my office, my former office in Washington, D.C., actually Falls Church, and Virginia. So we see most of our bird fatalities at buildings like this and at our homes. So almost all, greater than 99% of collisions are occurring at homes and low-rise buildings. Next slide. And why are birds colliding with glass? You know, these are amazing birds that a couple months after hatching from an egg can navigate their way from north of the Arctic Circle, if necessary, all the way down to Central and South America. Incredible birds, capable of doing things that I definitely could not do without a really good GPS and a lot of patience and energy. These birds can do that within a couple months of hatching from the egg, but glass is confusing to them. Glass is something that looks like they can fly through it, like they can fly into it, etc. And so you can see the feather print on this glass on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, we see lights. Birds are attracted into lit facilities, structures, etc., which brings them closer into proximity of glass where they could collide, or sometimes they just collide with the lit structure itself. Next slide. So what can we do? We have things we can do. This is one of those things where we know what to do. We just need to follow through. Well, we have this is an example of some of the most low cost or no cost options that we have. Later on in the presentation, my colleague Brian will share some additional methods that probably have more energy efficient implications. But these are some of the most basic things we can do. And we can do this at our home, anywhere. We can use stickers, paracord curtains, strips, soap, paint, screens, windows, external window screens will do the job to let the birds know that the glass is an obstruction, that they cannot fly into or through. In the upper right-hand corner of this slide, you'll see this 2x2 rule. And in the really, I love that in the poll where people put in ideas and things that they had used to reduce bird collisions. I saw the 2x4 rule. That was the tradition up until about maybe 4 years ago when we transitioned over to the 2-inch by 2-inch rule. And that means that there's no space on the glass that is greater than 2 inches by 2 inches in size. And we used to do 2x4, but then we realized that these hummingbirds, as tiny as they are, thought they could zip in between, and they were still suffering collisions. And so in the 2x2 rule, we are able to prevent collisions of all birds with that pattern, meaning all birds see it as an obstruction at that point. So next slide, please. So what doesn't work? And is this an important thing to talk about? Yes, it is, because many of us I used to use things that don't work. The things that don't work are products that are applied farther than 2 inches by 2 inches apart, such as the decal on the right-hand screen there. The cat's indoors, so that's good, but the decal is not dense enough to reduce collisions significantly. And on the left-hand side, we see hawk silhouettes that I really wish they worked, but they do not. And they are, again, not dense enough across the surface of the glass. We also need to see things on the exterior surface of the glass. Once in a while, window blinds on the inside will help to decrease light, and to, when the light's not hitting it and causing a reflection, it will be helpful. But we really need to see it 2 inch by 2 inches on the external surface of the glass. Next slide. Lighting is important. We can plan our lighting to reduce collisions, meaning we use it when and where we don't have excess lighting that is unnecessary. We can do this by minimizing lighting using daytime cleaning service instead of nighttime cleaning services. We can close the blinds to increase energy efficiency and reduce that light escape. But the important thing is when and where. Next slide. And this can be designed from the ground up, such as this building, our Fish and Wildlife Service building, which was designed to be bird friendly in its glass and its lighting. From the ground up, it was built that way. Next slide. And these products, and we hopefully will have these links in the chat, can be found at Design Light Consortium as well as Dark Sky International. They both provide easy access to dark sky products for your lighting. That can include timers, down shielding, and really minimizing the intensity of that light to decrease the pollution of the night sky, as well as to decrease bird attraction to your buildings, thereby decreasing the risk of collision. Next slide. And now we turn it over to my colleague, Brian. Thank you.
Thank you, Joelle. And I'm just going to talk about a few of these examples and some of the energy benefits that you may be able to gain. So this is a product, it's a ceramic frit. This can actually help reduce the reflectivity and reduce heat gain, but it also helps reduce bird collisions. As you can see, that's meeting the 2 by 2, 2 inch by 2 inch pattern that Joelle mentioned a bit ago. And Dan will talk a little bit here in just a second about some of the energy savings from some of the buildings that he's worked on and what you might be able to expect from something like that. Other things that you might be oh, next slide, please. Sorry. That you might see out there are as opportunities to reduce bird collisions. Planned accordingly, etched glass and various glazing options can not only alert birds to glass, but also provide for beneficial passive solar strategies that you might have designed for your buildings in areas where you're needing heating systems more often, in areas where you're needing cooling systems more often, or in buildings that have a significant amount of glass. Bird safe glazing and etching can actually reject solar heat gain and help disperse the natural light and reduce the need for artificial lights at times. There's also a product known as channel glass that can help reduce bird collisions, and it's often made of up to 60% recycled materials and low emissivity coatings, and they have pretty good high thermal performance as well. So next slide, please. You heard a little bit about films. There are a variety of film products that are out there. These are external window films. They're often patterned, solid colored, or frosted, and they're applied to the external surface to help reduce that reflectivity of the glass that cause birds problems. But they also can help reduce energy use, and also and they help increase privacy, security, reduce the glare inside. They can reduce UV light that can cause fading of interior finishes, and even provide some advertising opportunities, as I'll show in just a second. And there's just a diverse array of aesthetic needs to be met. You can see here on the left is the outside appearance of this film. The view from the inside, you can see right through it, no problem seeing external. And you can see some hawk silhouettes up there at the top that do not work, and that's why they have started replacing that film with external film. So next slide, please. And here's a little bit, this provides, I talked a little bit about that aspect of security and the potential for advertising. You can custom make these films to say anything you want, but it can help instill community pride, school pride, business pride, whatever it is, or provide that advertising opportunity. Next slide, please. So where can you learn more about this? This is obviously a very high level overview for you, but there are opportunities out there, and more are coming online more and more often. This is from our partners at American Bird Conservancy. They are actually offering a continuing education course that's out there for basically an overview of building design. Really cursory overview of just some of the opportunities and practices that are out there and available. And this is important at times. In some of these places, as was mentioned earlier, many municipalities are coming online with or considering various ordinances to incorporate bird-friendly measures into future buildings. And so incorporating these types of measures into the early design phase can help you attain sustainability and or conservation goals, and also help you be bird friendly. That could help you meet the standards for some of these ordinances that may come about. So next slide, please. And the interesting thing around some of these projects that we've seen is in our experiences that we've seen successful social events, community engagement opportunities around these types of projects. Depending on the types of products installed, you can actually have people help you with some of these things. And we also always see a sense of pride afterwards, simply because you're reducing a bird collision problem that often is bothersome to some that are either in the building using it as an office space or as a residence, or the community sees it as a problem and then you're providing a solution to that problem. So next slide, please. We're seeing more businesses incorporate this into their sustainability models, and they're also including a biodiversity conservation into these business models as well at an increasing pace. So coupling this energy conservation, sustainability model and bird conservation can really obviously help you save money and birds at the same time, but it can really help, as Joelle mentioned just a minute ago, help with that employee or human well-being, simply because bird collisions can be distracting at work because you can hear the thud, and you often do hear the thud of the bird colliding into the window. But some buildings, it's fairly frequent, it can be. It causes distractions and it's unsettling, but it's also unsightly to have carcasses lying around campus or on the sidewalks around your facility as well. So next slide, please. Another interesting thing is you can also often see very, very positive press through these. We've done a bunch of outreach around some of the work that we've done in cooperation with other partners. If your workforce and community are representative slice of America, like Joelle mentioned, a third of them are bird watchers or care about birds in some way. And so that's a huge impact right out of the gate around that issue. And we also found that bird watching is a huge economic engine. So if you can engage your community in a bird conservation project and energy conservation project, that's helping the economy as well. The annual economic impact in 2022 was almost $300 billion from activities around birding alone. So providing that outreach can give you positive press and really help reduce the problem and provide solutions in the local community. So next slide, please. And we're just seeing an uptick in the number of partners that are starting to engage in this. We're having many federal agencies, state agencies, a lot of nonprofit organizations, campuses are gaining in, cities are joining in. We actually have United Nations that have come out with statements on artificial light and the effect of that on humans. American Medical Association has adopted guidance to reduce the harm from high intensity street lights. And so we're seeing this growing community around reducing artificial light at night, which causes disorientation and understand what glass is on the landscape. So we're seeing this growing community that's really starting to adopt solutions around these problems. So this is my my closeout slide. If you go to the next slide, please. Really just an overview of just trying to tie these things together. And Dan's going to get into some examples where you can increase energy efficiency and get other co-benefits while also benefiting birds. And there's a wide array of options out there. And we're really seeing the society standards for the value of birds and dark night skies really starting to change how we affect the landscape and how we can be better stewards of that office space and workspace and living space. So next slide, please, and then we'll pass it over to Dan. So if you have any additional questions from the Fish and Wildlife Service, we are happy to help. Please feel free to reach out anytime. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian and Joelle. And speaking of taking your questions, we already have some great questions in Slido, slido.com with the event code DOE. And you all can add questions to it at any time, or again, use that thumbs up button that will, upvote your question up to the top for us. And that, excuse me, that link is also posted in the webinar chat. All right, well, I'm excited now to turn it over to Dan. He's the Director of Sustainability and a principal at FX Collaborative and has over 25 years of experience as an architect, has been working on bird-friendly building design since 2005. I know he has a lot of examples to share with us. So Dan, if you want to come on camera and take it away, that would be great.
Sure. Hi there. And apologies if there's a honking horn in the background. It just somebody did that. So anyway, I'm Dan, and I have a rapid fire set of examples for you. So next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about all of these buildings very briefly. If you just kind of click through, these are all a number of example projects that we've done here in New York City. The ones on the left were all institutional buildings that we did before Local Law 15 of 2020, which is New York City's bird-friendly building law. And then the 4 on the right were done after the law came into effect. So the ones on the right are specifically compliant with our local bird-friendly building law here in New York City. And you'll see some differences. Next slide. So this is the Center for Global Conservation, the first building I worked on that was bird-friendly, or tried to be bird-friendly. Chris Shepard from the American Bird Conservancy was going to be one of the people who occupied this building. So she helped us at the time understand bird collision issues, and we tested a number of strategies here. So next slide. The first strategy we tested was overhangs. At the time, it was thought that overhangs may be a bird-friendly strategy. Of course, overhangs can be an energy conservation strategy when used in the right way. Unfortunately, you can see through monitoring after the building was built, we determined that overhangs are not an effective bird-friendly strategy. So unfortunate, but as a demonstration project, useful. Next slide. The next strategy we tried was solar shading devices. Another, dual function thing. We were trying to save energy through shading, but also have it be bird-friendly. We figured out that the density of this particular pattern, those are about 1-inch thick pieces of wood, and they're spaced about 15 or 16 inches on center. That ended up being good for energy, but bad for birds because it was just spaced too far apart. The unfortunate thing is every other one was value engineered out. There was supposed to be twice as many, but then it became too expensive. So value engineering. But this strategy has promise, just has to be more dense to work for birds. Next slide. And in another area of the building, we used the first version of UV reflective patterns. This particular product is no longer on the market. It's been replaced by a different one, but next slide. We used it in one room, this main conference room, and you can see there's kind of a stripiness on the glass from the interior view looking out. That happens to be the aviary at the Bronx Zoo in the background. And there were no collisions at all on that. So it was a very bird-friendly strategy. But this one doesn't really, it has the co-benefit of preserving the view out and the view in, but does not deal with energy or anything else. Next slide. Elsewhere on the building, after it was built, Chris and her team tested different kinds of retrofit strategies. Here, there was a linear pattern applied to the glass, and It was just part of the ongoing kind of experimental nature of bird-friendly strategies on this. They must have tested dozens of retrofit strategies over time. Next slide. Here's another building. This is the New York Times building, which my office did in collaboration with an Italian architect. And here, the motivation was pure design. You can see there's this solar shading device. In this case, it's not wood. It's made of ceramic tubes that are about, I don't know, 1.5 inches or 2 inches in diameter. And they are meant to symbolize newsprint. So each facade has a piece of newsprint on it, and it's a building for a newspaper. So it's very design forward. However, I like to show this because this is a version of a denser solar shading device than the other one that I showed you. Next slide. You can see it's quite dense in areas. It maybe, I don't know exactly what the spacing is. It can't be any more than 3 inches, let's say, between those. And in those areas, that's quite a bird-friendly strategy. Now, this building was not really intended to be bird-friendly, so there's, the corners and the bottom are not covered by that. But I still like to refer to this as an example. Next slide. Here's an interior view. I actually met somebody who worked at the New York Times at a party once, and I asked them, I was like, "Oh, are those bars problematic for you when you're working there?" And they actually didn't even know what I was talking about. They had never really registered these things as a problem in terms of the view in and out. So that was good to hear. Next slide. So this is the Javits Center here in New York City. This is a before photo. Next. This is the glass that we replaced. It was a very dark glass, tinted, very reflective. At the time, this was the biggest bird killer in New York City, hundreds of birds per year. You can see the glass was all deteriorated, so we had to replace it. Next slide. And we installed the largest green roof, I think, in the country at the time, something like 7 acres. So we added habitat, and there's been more than 50 bird species have occupied the green roof since. We replaced some of the glass with just opaque surface where there was no need for a view, and the rest of the glass we replaced with new glass. Next slide. Here's that green roof. There's colonies of gulls nesting there now. Next slide. And this is the glass that we used to replace as a replacement. It's more clear, so not tinted, but it has a ceramic frit, like Brian had mentioned, one of these ceramic frit solutions. So that ceramic frit is on the it's not on the face of the glass, it's on an inboard surface. And in the next slide, you'll see what it looks like in place. Well, okay, before that, so threat factors. The metric to say whether a material is bird friendly or not is through the threat factor index. American Bird Conservancy and others do testing to see if birds react to patterns, and a number is assigned. So a threat factor of 1 is like the most bird friendly you can be, like a brick wall. However, I understand birds will run into things like brick walls, so nothing is perfectly bird friendly. And if a threat factor of 50 means there's no effect at all. ABC recommendation is threat factor of 30. However, in New York City, our limit is now 25. Next slide. Here are some illustrations to show what that looks like. So on the right is a 2-inch by 2-inch pattern with 1/4 inch diameter dots. That is the kind of maximum openness that is recommended. 2" by 4" is a little bit more open. It also has a threat factor that is under 30, but this is the recommended most open. Now, American Bird Conservancy has guidelines about how dense you can be before birds will not be able to resolve the pattern. So the recommendation is in the middle, 1/4" dots spaced about 1/4 inches apart. And that covers about 20% of the glass. So that pattern in the middle can have an effect on reducing solar heat gain because it covers about 20% of the glass. Now, on the left is what's usually used, like a very common pattern. It's similar to what we did at the Javits Center. It's not really considered bird friendly, like strictly speaking, because it's thought that it's too dense and birds can't resolve dots at that spacing of that size. However, it did work at the Javits Center. So next slide. And this is just to show there's many patterns of frit, and the more coverage, the more to the left you are on the scale, the more solar heat that frit pattern will reject. So the bird friendly ones are on the kind of lighter side, but less solar heat gain rejection. That's just where bird friendly patterns land on the spectrum of frit patterns. Next slide. So here's what that looked like in the Javits Center. This is a view inside. Next. And here's the view out. Now, one of the main goals of this project was to open up the view both out and in. Now here you're looking out and you can see the skyline. Originally, you couldn't see the skyline because of the very heavily tinted glass. So we, at the same time, opened up the view, controlled solar heat gain, controlled glare from the sun in through all this glass, and saved energy. Overall, the retrofit saved about 25% energy use in the building, and the frit was a big part of that. Next slide. Here's a view from the outside. You can't see this from far away, so that's good because people don't want to be disturbed by patterns. And fortunately, we did reduce the collisions here by over 90%. Next slide. Statue of Liberty Museum is another example. This class achieved the LEED credit for bird-friendly glass. Next slide. Here also views in and out were paramount. There are artifacts inside that needed to be seen from the outside. Next slide. And this is the pattern that we invented. This is a custom pattern that follows the 2x2 rule. Those kind of lines made of dots are spaced about 1 3/4 inches apart, more or less. So those are less than 2 inches apart. Next slide. And part of the custom pattern there with the linear dot pattern was that all around the site there was kind of a verticality. Here you can see the verticality of the skyline in the distance. Next slide. There's a flagpole in the foreground and the statue in the background, trees all over the site. So all of this verticality, we kind of wanted the pattern to blend in for humans as much as possible. And I haven't heard any complaints about this particular pattern. People love the building. Next slide. Here's another example, the School of Nursing at Columbia University. This has a different kind of frit pattern. Next. It's a translucent pattern that's on the number 1 or the outside surface of glass. So in addition to being bird friendly, only at the top portion, it also reduces glare for the neighbors. Next slide. the residential buildings across the way, you know, there was an intention to make this building not slick. Even though it was going to be all glass, we wanted it to be not non-reflective to have less impact on the neighbors. Also, students inside needed a level of privacy. Next slide. Similar at the Columbia University Business School, there is white and black frit that's used for design intention to, you know, make different parts of the building look different and accentuate the formal moves. These frits also save energy, reduce glare, and provide privacy. Next slide. More views. Next slide. And then just briefly, these are some buildings that now comply with our local law, that bird-friendly building law. And they do so in different ways. These two buildings use acid etched dots on the #1 surface of glass. Next slide. That's what those samples look like. One of them uses a 2x2 pattern, the other one a 2x4, and both of them meet the criteria. Next slide. Here's what that looks like. Those dots are somewhat apparent in different lighting conditions. You can see in the sun, you can see them in the shade. You can't. Looking from in out on the right, depending on the background, you can or can see them, or sometimes they go away. Next slide. And these are multifamily residential buildings, mind you, that all of the previous examples were institutional buildings. So it's really our law has really impacted the multifamily residential market. Nobody did bird-friendly buildings, multifamily residential buildings before, and now we're doing a lot of it. So here's another UV-friendly, UV patterned glass that's bird-friendly. Next slide. This was used at the ground floor storefront where retailers need merchandise to be seen. Next slide. We also use that same glass at this multifamily residential building. Next slide. You can see a little bit of stripiness, kind of like at the Center for Global Conservation, even though this is a different product. But from the inside out, you don't see anything at all. It doesn't disturb the view one bit. Next slide. And the last example, this is another multifamily residential building with a different UV patterned product. Next slide. That's what it looks like. It's hard to see the pattern. Next slide. And this is what it looks like from the inside and outside. You cannot see this at all from the inside, and also from the outside, it's not very present. And this is called Ornilux Mikado, and it's it complies with the threat factor for the law. Next slide. So, unfortunately, all those examples that are explicitly compliant with Local Law 15, those are all bird friendly. However, they don't provide the co-benefits of energy savings, glare reduction, and whatnot that some of the other more graphic, more present patterns provide. So we're in this world now where when we're designing buildings, we're often advocating for the kind of co-benefit strategies. So some clients are okay with that, but other ones really want to preserve the view, and that wins sometimes. So we're just using this arsenal of tools to approach bird-friendly design and helping our clients make the best decisions for their own situations. Next slide. And that's the end of my slides.
Great, thank you. Excuse me. Thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate all those examples, and especially so many iconic examples like the Statue of Liberty and so many of those New York buildings that I know a lot of us recognize. It's cool to see the different elements that maybe I didn't consider before. As a reminder, you all can still hop on slido.com to submit questions or upvote questions that already are there. If you're interested in learning more, we do have a resource document that is accessible now that includes some resources, suggested by our panelists and Better Buildings, including a Better Buildings fact sheet that we just published this week alongside Fish and Wildlife Service that sums up many of the things that we really talked about today. So I hope you all will check that out. And it'll also be available when we send out the recording to you all for this session. And with that, we are going to switch over to the Q&A. So I'll ask our panelists to come back on video, please. And again, it's not too late to go to slido.com and enter in with event code DOE and enter in your questions. Although we've got a decent amount, so I will go ahead and start with some of the top ones. So our first question here is, excuse me, got something in my throat. Would nighttime lights that are other than white light, for example, red, be less disorienting for birds?
Take a stab at that one. Yeah, it's a really good question, and I've worked with the communications tower industry for more than 2 decades on lighting and trying to understand what attracts in birds, what doesn't. And what we've learned is that light attracts birds, whether that be red or white. Flashing lights, like on a communications tower, if you can eliminate the non-flashing light, so the steady burning light, that works for a communications tower. But when we're talking about our buildings, adding flashing lights is probably not going to be very helpful for us. And when it comes to light color, all colors attract in migratory birds. The warmer colors in our, if we can use more warm, like orangish and yellowish lights compared to the bright white and bright blue, that seems to have less of an attraction to birds and less of a harm to our night skies. But light attracts in birds. So reducing light, using only when and where needed, and if necessary, to have a light to be able to downshield that and to put it on a timer to use as warm of colors as possible. That seems to be the most effective. And if we're talking about an oil rig outside on an offshore system where you can maybe play around with different color lights, green lights have had some potential for reducing bird attraction, but really the best option is to just reduce that light, use it as dimly as possible, as warmly as possible, only when and where needed.
Thanks, Joelle. I appreciate you reiterating that point from your presentation as well, because when it comes to energy efficiency, using light only when and where it's needed is also a really key tenet there. So definitely an example of where there could be co-benefits. Joelle, we're going to keep you in the hot seat because I think you're the right person for the next question, which is, do these strategies also help with bats?
That's a great question. And I will admit that it wasn't until a couple of, probably in the last 6 months, that I started hearing more about bat collisions with buildings. It's not nearly as common as with bird collisions at buildings, but we do see bats. I looked into it a little bit, and the research demonstrates that bats, their echolocation that they use to understand where they are in relation to objects around them, it doesn't work properly with really shiny surfaces, whether that be glass or highly polished metal or anything, or something like that. So it seems to really mess up their echolocation. The designs that we were talking about today, I don't think we actually know if it works on bats. To be completely honest, I don't think that we know if it's going to be helpful with bats because of their way of navigating. They should be able to see the dots too, but they're really an acoustic navigating animal. And so at this point, I'm not sure if we know. It would be really interesting to find out.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's kind of a, I guess, an obvious answer about the echolocation that I hadn't considered either. So I appreciate that.
One of the things to also consider is reducing light around your buildings can reduce the attraction of insects, and bats are notorious for being moth eaters, other bug eaters, insect eaters. So reducing that light around those surfaces would help as well, just because from the bug attraction standpoint. So
that's great, and thank you for catching that. And these are recommendations that we give to anybody who is developing especially in the places where the endangered bats, is reduce the lighting. So thank you very much for catching that, Ryan.
That's a great point, Brian. Dan, we're going to pop over to you for our next question here, which is, how have you successfully convinced a client to pursue bird-friendly design, or have they had to be interested in that to begin with? And was energy efficiency a part of that discussion at all? Dan, you're on mute.
Thank you. The National Park Service was easy to persuade. It was in at the Statue of Liberty Museum. It was in their standards that the issue must be, taken into consideration. So we did that, and it was a pretty easy sell there. For a lot of the other buildings, we really sold the strategies on energy or design or other kind of primary intentions, and kind of snuck in bird friendly in that way. So for example, the Javits Center, they knew they had a bird collision problem, but they really had a mandate to reduce energy use and to open up the view in and out so that the facility could function better and just be financially viable. So the bird friendly quality there was we knew all along that it was FRIT was going to do that. But it wasn't the primary motivator, similar with the Columbia Business School or the New York Times building. So it really took the local law 15 of 2020 in New York, which I helped advocate for, to, make it mandatory. And now everybody has to do it, 75 feet and below, and, for most of the glass. So now it's just a matter of how and not if.
And it's interesting, Dan, because so much of your presentation, where you showed visibility of the occupant experience and the outside, it is, as I'm sure you know, so much of what we do also in energy efficiency when it comes to different window films. And so I think sometimes I don't know, a picture's worth 1,000 words for those, of showing to what degree a view might or might not be impacted, when you can also realize other co-benefits in energy efficiency or in bird friendliness. Excellent. Well, I'll move along to our next question here, which is it better to prioritize indoor or outdoor lighting renovations? And anyone's welcome to pop in on that.
I can give that a try. That's a really good question. And oftentimes we understand that we are in this position where we need to prioritize which to do first. And thinking about how birds are attracted into light. They're attracted into light at multiple scales. So when they're migrating at night at high elevations, high altitudes, they're flying, and they will be, science has demonstrated that they are attracted into lit areas such as a city. Once they get into a city, they are then attracted further into the actual source of the light itself. So reducing light overall is important. And as far as the question of which one to prioritize more, indoor versus outdoor, well, the birds are colliding with glass that's attached to the indoor environment. So my first gut response would be to focus on the indoor lighting. However, and that would probably protect birds more often than extinguishing the lights outside the building or reducing that light outside the building. However, to protect dark skies, which is part of some of the ordinances that we're seeing an increase in number of, that would be probably your outdoor lighting would be your focus. So that it's a bit of a gray area there. To really protect the birds, I think indoor lighting would be your highest priority, followed by outdoor lighting. But I'm going to throw one more but in there, and that is, what if you're in a completely dark landscape? You are the only building and facility in an otherwise dark landscape. Then get those outdoor lights down as soon as possible, and then start focusing on the indoor. So I apologize, it's a bit of a gray answer, but I think we can all understand the reasoning behind it. If we're surrounded by lights in an urban environment, focus on yourself and get those lights turned down, and then work out from there. But if you're in an otherwise dark landscape, focus on your outdoor lighting and work inward. The idea is to reduce the attraction of birds to the area, and especially your lit glass.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, Joelle. And not surprisingly, it's not just a binary there.
Yes.
I think we have time for one more question here, which is a little bit more specific. That question is, Is there a size of pane or a minimum amount of glass where this becomes a priority? As in, should every single piece of glass be treated, or should only buildings with large, clear panes be prioritized?
I'm going to keep my answer kind of short and give others a chance to answer as well. I would say that all of us who are aware of this issue are sometimes shocked at the tiny panes of glass that birds collide with. That being said, there seems to be parts of our buildings that seem to have an increase in bird fatalities. Presence of bird feeders or other things that attract in birds doubles the chances of birds hitting the glass near those bird feeders. So concentrations of birds and the way the light hits the glass and shows a reflection of a vegetation. So if we're already seeing bird prints on the glass, powder prints, bird fatalities at the bottom of that building, that's going to be where you want to start if you have to prioritize. And in that in that realm, I would say almost every pane of glass matters. But I welcome the thoughts of others. I'm going to let others speak.
Well, anecdotally, I had a bird collide with my bathroom window in a row house here in Brooklyn, and the top of it had a insect screen, so the bottom didn't. And relatively small, normal size window. And I suspect that even if it had like an old style mutton, across it, like I think that collision probably would have still happened.
Yeah, and I'll touch on it just real quick, just to build onto what Joelle talked about. We had a Fish and Wildlife Service building that was notorious for having bird collision problems. They treated the entire building, and I mean, almost completely eliminated the problem. The only place they didn't treat was one of the front doors, just because they wanted some visibility for security and wanted people to know that the place was, all that sort of thing. And they didn't treat the top part of the front door, and that's the only place where they've had an issue, and they've had to go back and try to do that. So if you have a building that's notorious for bird collisions, you really have to try to figure out exactly where the problems are, or if it's a complete problem. And you usually will know that fairly easily. If you spend any time walking around or talking to people or looking at the glass, you can see a lot of the dust prints like Joelle had showed pictures of earlier. So unfortunately, sometimes the answer is all the glass. Sometimes it's you can eliminate the problem, or at least reduce the problem significantly by treating certain aspects of the building. So it really does depend situationally. So, but it's amazing the size of the window that they can hit, fairly small. So.
Great. Well, I appreciate all those insights, and those responses definitely also speak to your two by two rule and why that is so critical. Excellent. We can bring our slides back up. Just a couple of things to wrap up here. This is actually our last webinar of the fall series. So thank you for being along for the ride for all of these. And next week we'll be announcing our winter series. So stay tuned for that. Next slide. I also want to invite you to join me in Washington, D.C. this spring, April 30th to May 2nd. For our Better Buildings, Better Plants Summit. We have dozens of sessions that really cover all topics of energy efficiency, and I hope that you'll join us for it, for some peer exchange and also to learn from our experts in the field. Next slide. And with that, I just want to say thank you so much to all of our panelists today. This is a topic that's also just near and dear to me personally as a birder and someone who watches a lot of birds. So I really appreciate you spending your time and expertise with us today. For all of our attendees, you can reach out to our partners here if you haven't had your question answered. And again, we'll send out an email when this webinar is posted on our Better Building Solutions Center, along with that fact sheet that I mentioned. So thank you all so much for coming, for speaking, for sharing your expertise, and we'll see you at the next Better Buildings webinar.